Here we have the much talked about Timex Q. I feel really fortunate to have gotten this watch. Shout out to those who posted on it immediately on the watch forums. I've been in the market for a few different watches, and when I saw this come up for $180, I thought that wasn't too bad, and then I found out that I could apply for the email and got an extra 15% off. So this ended up being a fantastic deal, and it's pretty funny because I remember reading the forums after I had purchased it. I had felt a little guilty because some people on the forums had mentioned that this watch was overpriced, that at $179 it was just too much for a quartz watch, let alone a Timex quartz watch. Well, what's funny about that is if any of you have taken time to look at the prices on these on eBay, then you would be quick to know that these have been listed for as much as $650. Now, whether anyone's paying that price is another question, but I think these are regularly selling in the $400 to $500 price range. I've seen a few of them get snatched up. So I consider myself lucky that I didn't have to pay that premium. And I understand that sometimes supply and demand can play a part in pricing out these watches, but I definitely think for the price that Timex had listed it for is definitely well worth the price. So going into a little bit of the details on the watch, this is, as many of you can already tell, a Pepsi type bezel. Now the bezel is graduated with 12 markers, and so that is supposed to in some ways help you tell two different time zones. Now it doesn't do it in a way that a traditional GMT would do it. I have a Rolex GMT myself, Explorer 2, that has a dedicated GMT hand that allows me to tell a second time zone. Typically that would happen with a 24-hour graduated marker. However, this being 12, it could still work well with a watch that doesn't have a dedicated GMT hand. So let me explain. I currently live in the Eastern time zone, and I don't have the watch properly set to the time that I'm living in right now. I just kind of put it at the famous 10:10. And but if I wanted to tell the time zone in a different area, I have a lot of friends and family that live in Colorado, then all I would have to do is change the time zone on the bezel by shifting it 2 hours. Now I'm going 2 hours into the negative, right? So I'm smart enough to realize that if I don't look at this bezel on the outside, I could tell that it's 10:10 as anybody normal would looking at a watch. However, if I pay attention to the outside of the bezel, I'll notice that it says 8:10, or I guess technically at this time 8:12. So by doing that, I could see two different time zones at the same time. Because I know that I've set it to Colorado, I know that it's not going to be so far in the future or so far in the past that I'm not worried about AM or PM. I already know that typically, since it's only 2 hours in the past, I know that it's 8 PM because it's nighttime at this time. Now, it's limited in that regard, but still functional. This bezel is a little different than what you would find in maybe a more traditional watch. Just kind of giving you a little bit of a close-up of it. What you'll see with this bezel is it has pretty large plastic that is sandwiched in between the bezel and the case. And I'm guessing that this is what the bezel is using in order for it to be friction fit, because it is not a ratcheting bezel, meaning that you're not hearing any of those clicks as you rotate it. The positive about that is a lot of watches that offer a GMT function typically are unidirectional, meaning that you can only turn it one way, and it's usually within this direction. And the good news is because it's friction fit, it can move bidirectionally. Now that there is a trade-off in my opinion, because the ratcheting sound can be very satisfying, and not only could it be very satisfying, but it's also reassuring within its clicks. You're not hearing any clicks, and in my opinion, as you rotate this bezel, you'll notice that certain spots are tighter than others. My guess is that this plastic is probably unevenly cut, or the case is somehow between the plastic and the case, there's spots that are tighter and looser that is allowing certain sections of this bezel to feel a little tighter on the turn and a little looser on the turn. But this works, and it works fine. It wouldn't work as a dive watch, but then again, this only has a 50 meter water resistance, which if you don't know, 50 meters is a questionable water resistance. Most people would say that 50 meters would not be good enough to actually dive to that depth in. There are some that actually think that it can handle those kinds of things, but at the very least, people would say that it's probably splash proof. So you wouldn't be using this to dive anyway, so you wouldn't have to worry about the fact that it's super easy to rotate this bezel. But you know, at this price point, it offers something really interesting that a lot of watches don't typically offer. Something that bothers me with other brands, and I might get some flack for mentioning them, so I'll refrain. But there are watches out there that offer Pepsi bezels, but don't necessarily have the traditional 24-hour clicks. So a traditional ratcheting Pepsi bezel would be a 24-hour click bidirectional. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. The Steinhardt, for instance, is an example of this. Because they're trying to keep their costs down, when they've created their bezels, they've done the same exact bezels, the same exact springs and gearing in the bezels are I imagine the same ones that they use for their traditional divers. So because of that, even though you get a GMT bezel, it's usually 120 click ratcheting unidirectional bezel, which I personally don't like having for a GMT. I think I prefer a friction fit bidirectional bezel that isn't ratcheting at all versus something that is working all the wrong ways. So for me, I rather have a 24-hour click traditional bidirectional bezel or this, and leave those unidirectional bezels elsewhere for the traditional divers. And in fact, that's actually what has kept me from buying a Lodge watch like a Steinhardt Pepsi, even though I think they're really well-made watches. So this is a really, really cool piece. As far as the quartz movement, it is a Seiko quartz movement, and on the back side, it has a hatch that you can actually open with a coin. So you would just take a coin and turn that hatch, and by doing so, if you turn it counterclockwise, you can open up the hatch and replace the battery if your battery happened to wear out. You got to make sure that hatch is nice and closed because obviously water can go in. And on the back side of this, it says that it is a Japanese movement. However, I believe the rest of the watch has been manufactured in China. Timex is an American company, but most of their watches are made in China. I guess with the exception being their heritage watches that they've released, as well as some of their Japanese movements. I just noticed that this watch has a little bit of scratching on the side, which I never saw that before. That's interesting. I haven't worn this watch, so I'm kind of surprised to see that. Interesting. Well, anyways, getting back to the watch, I think this is a beautiful watch. It wears really well. I'll put it on the wrist really quickly. What you would typically do is you'd fold this over like this, allow the first hook to catch right here, as you can see, and then clasp goes in. And this 38 millimeter, at least on my wrist, is perfect. Bracelet is definitely retro, and for me, I'm not used to this style, so it is a little peculiar. Something that I would like to note that I haven't seen a lot of people make mention of is on the Timex website, it says that this is an 18 millimeter lug width. Now, I believe that is true, but as you will notice, this opening is most likely the 18 millimeters. However, the bracelet actually extends further than that. So I'm guessing that at the start of this bracelet right here is 20 millimeters, and it looks like it tapers down to either an 18 or a 16 is what I'm guessing. But it definitely tapers down, I would say probably to an 18 to the center, which I like that better. I personally have owned some 18 millimeters at the top of the lugs in the past, and because I wear so many watches with 20 millimeters, they can feel a bit small. Now, this watch may look a little bit larger on me. I do have smaller wrists. However, as you look further away, the watch comes into proportion. It's a beautiful watch. If you see any distortion, it's either from the acrylic or the fact that I'm still keeping the sticker on it at this point. And I'll probably take that off eventually. But I like it. I think the last thing, or at least one of the last things I'll mention is Timex watches typically have movements that I consider to be rather loud. So if you've ever owned a weekender in the past, then one of your complaints might be, man, I'm trying to go to bed, I put the weekender on my dresser, and I can't sleep because this thing is loud as can be. This is not the case with this Timex Q. I do not hear the movement at all. And I'll give you a chance to see if you can listen in and hear it. Yeah, I do not hear it at all. So it's very quiet, likely because it's the Seiko. So I'm very thankful for that. Overall, this is a great watch. I hope that Timex decides to offer up a second order, considering that I think they sold out within 24 hours. I think the US or UK was sold out in less time than 24 hours. I'm pretty sure by the evening they were totally sold out. I think that only says that they need to create more. Now, some watch brands are into doing the limited editions and then using that as a way to leverage future editions so that people buy their watches while they can. I hope Timex doesn't do that. I hope that they just let the people have what they want, and at $180, let this watch be what the SKX is for so many people. And that is an entry-level watch into the world of horology. I think that this Timex can do that for a lot of people, and if anything, I can see this being that watch that if you participate in watch-loving communities, I can see this being one of those watches that people tell people to try out as their first recommendation, or at least one of their recommendation, especially for a quartz. I don't think quartz gets a lot of love, but I can't see why someone would not recommend this watch for sub $200. I mean, think about it. What other sub $200 watch could you get out there that has the longevity that a Timex has had as a company? So you're getting the heritage, and then you're also getting a watch that is not only a heritage with a company, but an actual reissue itself. So you're getting a watch that has heritage itself and has been designed with a very killer look. I love this Pepsi bezel. Another cool thing about this Pepsi bezel is the blue is not as bright as you would maybe see typical on the made famous GMT Pepsi from Rolex. I think this Pepsi is closer to what we see with the Tudor Pepsi. And I think that's a good thing because under certain lights, it can almost look like a Coke. But on most lights, it still looks like a traditional Pepsi, but just not as bright. And I'm okay with that. I like that. I like that subtle blue. I think it keeps it unique, keeps it different, and this is a beautiful watch. Although the Pepsi doesn't offer any normal function since it's not 22 hours. Just so you know, the traditional Pepsi is supposed to offer daylight time and then evening hours. So that's why it has those two different colors, is because one represents daylight hours and then the other one represents evening hours, so nighttime being the blue. And that doesn't make sense on a 12-hour, it only makes sense on a 22-hour, but I can still appreciate the aesthetic. I guess that would be technically a form over function decision on Timex, which I am okay with. So one last little roll of the watch, and this is certainly a beauty. And this is my first video. I've made it long only because in my own world I really actually appreciate the longer watch videos and enjoy it when someone takes their time talking about the watch, and I hope I've done that for anyone watching today. On a personal level, I felt like I've had a lot of watches pass through my hands that I had wished there was more talk about those watches before I purchased them. And I thought to myself, man, there's been a lot of watches that maybe someone else could have felt that same way and logged on to YouTube and typed in their watch and it wasn't there. So I'm going to try to do my best and share my journey with buying watches. I tend to be a chronic flipper. I don't make money off of much of the watches I buy. I try to break even if I can. But I'm a chronic flipper only because I just love getting a new piece in my hand and trying new things out. So hopefully I can get some new videos. I have some great watches in my current collection, and I have some new watches coming my way, and I'd love to talk more about them. So if you would like to see more videos, help me see that you want that by liking my page and perhaps even subscribing it. So thank you for your time and thank you for watching this video. I'll do my best to answer any questions or comments that you might have about the watch. So feel free to leave your questions in the comment section below, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll talk to you later.